Hey everyone, and if you have been keeping up with the news in the last hour or so, you might know that Governor Ivey has just announced publicly an amended Safer at Home order. Now, there's a good amount of changes that are coming in the Safer at Home order, and all of this goes into effect tomorrow at 5. So my name is Ivana. I am here to recap that press conference and go over the new things in that order with you. I'm joined today by our Montgomery reporter, Mike Cason, who was at that press conference, who has covered all of these Governor Ivey press conferences for us. And Mike, we so appreciate it. So while we still have people jumping on, let me just say again, we are here today to go over the amended Safer at Home order that the governor just announced about an hour ago. Now, there's a lot of changes coming. These all go into effect starting tomorrow, May the 22nd at 5 p.m. And this new order that starts tomorrow will end on July the 3rd at 5 p.m. So we can probably expect another update from the governor before that July 3rd day to see what's going to happen going past that date. So seems like we've got some more people on now. If y'all have got questions, please let us know. I've got some paperwork in front of me. Mike has the order as well and some paperwork in front of him so we can hopefully answer your questions. But Mike, you were there. Let's go off first and talk about what is changing tomorrow at 5 p.m.
Well, a lot is changing. I think a lot of people were surprised, or people I talked to were surprised that she opened up as much as she did. But the new updates, the entertainment venues such as arcades, theaters, bowling alleys are all opened. Athletic activities we allow, like youth baseball, softball, practice allowed starting May 23rd, competition starting June 15th. Educational institutions can reopen with in-person classrooms. She lifted a restriction on child care facilities. They had been opened already, but a limit of 12 children per room, and that was lifted. And also summer camps are open, subject to social distancing. A lot of new guidelines and precautions going along with these reopenings.
Yeah, I know that was something that's kind of noted right up front on this paperwork from the governor's office that while we say most of these things are open now, they are not fully open. There are still social distancing guidelines that are in place for these facilities, sanitation rules and guidelines as well. Some of those are not super specific in a lot of this paperwork we have right now, but we're trying to delve in and get that to you. Just right off the bat, before some of y'all's questions get lost in the fray, Kenneth asking, are nightclubs open? That's a good question, Kenneth. Mike and I were talking about that right before we went live. So there's a whole list. I will put it here in the comments below. There's a whole list of things that fall under entertainment venues that open. Again, like Mike said, those are arcades, theaters, bowling alleys, casinos, adult entertainment, racetracks, planetariums, museums, concert venues. Nightclubs was not mentioned in that paragraph. We're going to look at it. We're going to get it to you, but it does not look like nightclubs, and I'm putting that in quotation, that the things that the order is considering nightclubs to be are open at the moment. Again, the entertainment venues that open tomorrow are things like arcades, theaters, bowling alleys, bingo halls, casinos, adult entertainment, racetracks, planetariums, museums, concert venues, auditoriums, performing centers, things like that. So those, go ahead, Mike.
I'm not sure what the distinction would be, though, but you're right. It's not, nightclubs are not listed, but I'm not sure there's not much distinction between nightclubs and some of these other places that are opening, like, as far as people being close together.
Yeah, there's been a lot of controversy about between a lot of business owners and people in the community about that very topic. And we hope to have more information for you on that in both the video and some stories maybe coming soon. So we'll get you on that, Kenneth, but it looks like technically the nightclubs are not listed in the things that are going to be open at the moment. Now there are, let's see, I saw a good question here about casinos. Miranda, yes, casinos are allowed to open in this order again tomorrow at 5, and that lasts through July the 3rd at 5. Some other things that Mike talked about, if you missed it, I'll go ahead and recap it. Athletic activities can restart practice on the May the 23rd, which is on Saturday, I believe. Yes, it's on Saturday. I had to look at my calendar. And competition is allowed June the 15th. So that's a little bit later here. Pee-wee, adult entertainment can open. Yes, that's correct. Adult entertainment and not nightclubs, technically. So we're trying to get to the bottom of it. But yes, that is exactly what we said here. So Mike, do you know anything? We're coming into Memorial Day weekend. Everybody, including myself, wants to get outside. Do we know anything about pools and recreational facilities?
They're open. I believe I'll double check that, but pools and recreational facilities, I believe, are open. I'm sorry, this is all fresh to me, and I'm flipping through it.
That's fine. While you flip through, I've got the full order in front of me, and I was looking for that nightclub line. So again, y'all, we're getting this order at the same time. So we're kind of looking through this at the same point you are. Now, while we did mention those things that are reopening tomorrow at 5 or are allowed to reopen tomorrow at 5, there are still social distancing, sanitation rules and guidelines according to the governor's office. Coretta asked about bingo halls. Yes, Coretta, bingo halls can reopen tomorrow starting at 5 along with racetracks. I know one person says pools have been open since last week. Awesome. My pool, unfortunately, is not open yet. I know some apartment complexes haven't opened their pools either. So that might now, even if they are technically allowed to reopen, as Mike said, some may have not. And that's important to note when it comes to retail, pools, things like that. A business may have be allowed to, but has not made that decision yet. And
I believe Dr. Harris said at the press conference that pools had been open or had been allowed to be open. So
great.
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
Now, we've gotten a couple of questions, Mike, about there's been a jump in our numbers statewide of COVID cases. What did the governor say about that in relation to opening more businesses and more facilities when our numbers are not dropping?
Well, she was specifically asked, a few weeks ago, and Dr. Harris had said they were going to be data driven and not date driven, and they were going to go by the data, which I think people assume that meant the health data. And she was asked about that, and her, I don't remember her exact words, but her tone was sort of like businesses are collapsing, and this is we need to move on to the step of incorporating this into our lives and just rely on personal responsibility. So she's leaning in the direction of reopening things, even though there's some troubling numbers out there health-wise, and I'm sure there's going to be people that disagree with that. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are supportive.
Right.
But that seems to be the direction she's heading in.
It got an interesting question from Helen that I've put here on the screen. What about music concerts and indoor plays and concerts?
Let's see. I believe those are open. See.
I've got on the order that I know you're fine. He's got a lot of paperwork in front of me. I at least have a desk I can spread out against. And so from the order that goes into effect tomorrow, it looks like, Helen, that performing centers can open and concert venues are allowed to open. So those places can open.
Right. Concert venues are specifically listed, right?
So those places can open. That doesn't mean your music might start tomorrow. I'm sure that those venues have to still book things and follow their order of business, but those facilities can open.
Right.
There's a couple questions talking about pools. How do you social distance in a pool? Any information on that, Mike, that the health officer provided?
No, not that I'm aware of. No, I'm not aware of any details on that.
Francis, she asked, are swimming pools open? That's something we've been talking about. It looks like, yes, they are allowed to open. Some pools may have not chosen to open yet, but the state has allowed them to open. Now, let's talk about, Mike, this was changed in the last amendment. I know there's been several amendments to this order, the Safer at Home order, so y'all bear with us here. But on one of the prior amendments to the order, that number of gathering size was taken away. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. Yeah. Prior to the last order, there was a prohibition on gatherings of 10 or more, and there's no number now. It's just a prohibition on any gatherings where you can't observe the 6-foot social distancing. So that didn't change today, as far as I know. That was already that numerical limit had already been lifted.
Right. Now, yes, sir. Yes, sir. That is my understanding. There has not been a cap on gathering size in a little bit. I do not remember the date off the top of my head when that changed, but it was in the last order. So that is staying the same. Good question from Randall. And again, I think we've got people kind of coming in and leaving. So if we go over the same things and you're still with us, bear with us, please. But Randall asks about Little League softball and baseball, excuse me. Do you want to go over those dates again, Mike?
They can start practicing tomorrow or the 23rd, which I guess is Saturday. And competition starts, I believe it's, let's see, June 15th, I believe it was. I don't have it right in front of me, but mid-June. So practice can start this weekend. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I know my grandson is on a t-ball team, and they had a few practices and then they had to disperse, and I guess some of them will come back, some of them won't. Some parents will want to come back, some won't. So they may have to reduce the size of the leagues or do something like that, sort of condense the teams.
Right. I think that most of us, can agree, take it outside of a pandemic, but youth T-ball is one of the cutest things in the world to watch. So those practices, like Mike said, can start on Saturday. Competition is allowed June the 15th. Interesting question from Lauren here. She says, are face coverings and masks, I'm assuming she means, are still encouraged?
Yes. Yes, that hasn't changed. They're still encouraged, and it's still required, for certain people in certain venues, employees, and so forth.
Beverly asked, did the governor say anything about educational institutions? I'll let you answer that one, Mike.
Yes, they can open. Educational institutions are one of the categories of institutions that they're going to be allowed to reopen and have in-person instruction. And again, there's a lot of restrictions and guidelines on that.
I got another question that I'm going to toss to you, Mike, because you are our Montgomery person. Frank asks, what about, he said the Harriet. I'm not sure if he means the Harriet or the Marriott, but the riverboat in Montgomery. Any?
It sounds like they could be open if they wanted to. I don't know if they are, but I would certainly think they fall under one of these categories that were reopened. Tourist attractions. I don't see why they could not reopen, but I don't know specifically, and I don't know. I guess that'll be their decision. Right
now, I'm watching the comments coming on the side. If y'all see my eyes darting, Monica is making a question here. Y'all gonna have these kids playing in masks in the heat? Monica, the state does not have any sort of regulation regarding masks. The state has not required them. So people in a city where that is not required are not the children or adults are not required to wear those masks. There are some places like Birmingham where that is a requirement. So if your question is about children in Birmingham having to practice in masks, I don't know the answer to that. But statewide and places where there's not a requirement to wear a mask, unless a certain facility requires it, then no, your child would not have to practice in a mask if you and your child chose that route. Interesting question from, excuse me if I mess up your name, but Jimin Lee. And this is something I think are on a lot of people's minds. She said, what's happening with wedding receptions? I know lots of weddings that have been canceled through this, and I'm sure you do too, Mike. So any ideas about some of those venues where these wedding receptions might be held?
It would seem to me they would be open now based on this list. I can't see why those would be excluded from the places that are allowed to open. I don't see event venues specifically listed, but if concert venues, theaters, performing arts centers are open, I don't see how they could have event centers or places where you have wedding receptions and those type of events closed.
Right. Yeah. So G-Man, I would say that, check with your venue, but it looks like most of these venues, and obviously I don't know where you're getting married or having your reception, but a lot of these venues, auditoriums, performing centers, they are allowed to open tomorrow. So, and there's also no statewide order on that gathering size as long as there's a 6-foot social distance maintained. So check with your venue. Let us know for sure what that venue is and if they are opening for you. We have some other questions about if individual cities will make the decisions regarding masks. So, Matthew, you're right about that. There are cities like Birmingham that have made that decision. Do you know anything else about that, Mike, you can speak to about individual cities or Parks and Rec departments making those decisions regarding masks?
I don't know anything specifically about that, but I think that is I think that's at their discretion if cities, like Birmingham want to do that. I think that's at their discretion.
Mm-hmm. G-Min says she will check and report back about her wedding venue. Please do. I know, like I said, some of these things are open, but I don't know where you're getting married. I got married at a farm, so that was open. But Sharice has a great question here. What about summer camps and daycare? I don't think we've gone over that, Sharice. So thank you for reminding us. Summer camps can open. And I'll refer to Mike for other info about that. But summer camps can open, and daycare, there had been a restriction on the number of children allowed in a daycare. They were open, but there was that cap at 12. And that cap has been lifted. So they are open, subject to social distancing, sanitation rules, guidelines, things like that. Anything else you can add, Mike?
Summer, as you said, summer camps are open. There's a full page here of guidelines and health and safety practices that they're supposed to do. And I haven't read them, but I would assume they're similar to other other guidelines for other venues, for other activities.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, summer camps can open, and child care centers, as you said, they lifted the limit of 12 per room. 12 children per room.
George asking about the Wind Creek Casino. Casinos are allowed to open tomorrow. That's May the 22nd at 5 p.m. I've not heard from any representatives from Wind Creek specifically, but casinos are allowed to reopen. Have you heard from them at all, Mike?
No, I haven't, but that'll be something we'll need to check on immediately if we haven't already.
Mm-hmm. We got more questions about the nightclubs, dance clubs. That is, again, definitely much discussed topics. Nightclubs are not listed in what is allowed to reopen now. Concert venues, auditoriums, performing centers, bingo halls, adult entertainment, those are specifically listed as being able to open. Nightclubs are not. So we're going to have to circle back with you on that point. But that is not in this order at the moment. There are lots of questions about how to maintain social distancing, but one I will toss to you, Mike. Joy asks about guidelines for marching bands.
Boy, people come up with good questions. There's so many different things that sort of fall in these gaps.
I have not, Joy, we might have to, I will definitely, I'm going to answer a few questions while I let Mike look for that. I'm not sure that that's in the order, but I'm going to let him look while I go through some of your other questions. I know some people talking about gym, they are going or they're not going. Those gyms have been allowed to reopen since the last amendment. Now, again, that is a subject to social distancing and occupancy and sanitation guidelines. So lots of gyms are technically open with restrictions. So if you feel comfortable to go, then you could walk through those doors and actually physically go. Men, Harry, what about churches? So their churches have been allowed to operate and have in-person services, and those services just have to be socially distanced for people that are not in the same household as, which is kind of a rule for all these things that we're talking about. But lots of churches have already been holding in-person services since the last amendment. Some churches are still only doing streaming. I encourage you to check with your church before you drive and head that way. You got any news through looking through that paperwork, Mike?
No, but I did see where the order specifically says entertainment venue does not include nightclubs, which are covered and subject to paragraph 18. And
so it looks like those nightclubs.
That's still unclear to me. Because
yeah, nightclubs are still in this order not allowed to open. We will have a video. I actually shot some stuff for a video on that the other day, and we're going to get you some more information on that. And we understand that's a fuzzy line, and there's a lot of things that maybe some people would consider nightclubs that are open and vice versa. So we're going to do our best to get you some more clarity on that, and also to get ourselves clarity. Angie has a good question that I think you will be more knowledgeable about than me, Mike. She asks about, are they increasing testing?
Well, generally they are, but I don't know of any specific steps to increase testing. But there's generally been more testing going on. But I didn't hear anything announced today about increased testing. Sorry.
Kathleen asks, who is going to police the adherence to these guidelines?
I think they're relying on business owners, employees, and customers, and I think that's probably the only realistic way to do it. But there's the governor talked a lot about personal responsibility, or she mentioned that as that's going to be a big part of getting through this is personal responsibility.
Now getting some more questions about casinos. I know that somebody said that they do not see a reopening date posted from Wind Creek. It's very possible. I have not checked since that press conference ended just a little bit ago and we jumped on here, but casinos are allowed to reopen tomorrow. That does not mean that they necessarily will, but they will be allowed to. So got a question or comment from Carla about the child care centers and daycares. And you're right, that 12 person or that 12 kid cap that was on these daycare facilities has been lifted. So they are just subject to social distancing rules and guidelines and not to a specific number of children limit.
Right.
So
they already have child to staff ratios that the state enforces, or that's part of the state regulation. So it doesn't mean there's an unlimited number of children per room in daycares now.
That's a good point, Mike. That's a very good point. I am not a parent. I do not have children. I have not put a child in daycare. So good point to make there, Mike. There are some questions, and I think that these questions are referring to tracing, any sort of tracing app or tracing mechanisms. Anything talked about in that regard at the press conference?
Yes, that was talked about, and I'm sorry, I in trying to live stream the press conference, there's certain things that I didn't fully grasp as they were talking about it. I apologize for not having the answer to that.
Diane, we will get it to you. We do have a story on AL.com where you can watch the press conference. Also, you can watch it here on our Facebook page, watch it back. And we're updating that with more information about what's in the order. And also we're following it up with some more stories from some of our really talented reporters about what is happening and the changes that are coming. So I'll take a couple more questions and then we will hop off and let Mike get back to getting us some of these answers. So good question from Latrell, amusement parks. Do you have any answers on amusement parks, Mike?
Yes, it sounds like they're open. Tourist attractions, including water parks, theme parks, amusement. Yes, they're open.
Okay, amusement parks open, Latrell. Another thing I just wanted to note that these
They can't be open. I'm sorry.
They cannot be open.
They can be open. Yeah. No, they can be open.
They can be open. Okay.
I said they're open. It's up to the amusement park, but they're not restricted from being opened.
Right,
they
got
can
it.
Can be open.
Latrell, so they can open, but before you drive anywhere, I would call and check. But as of tomorrow at 5 p.m., they are allowed to be open. Let's just one more time reiterate that these gatherings that have people from different households or different families, the state is requiring 6 feet of distance between people that are not from the same household. So what that means is whether you live with your family or not, whoever you're living with is the only person you're supposed to be within 6 feet of. So obviously Mike and I are in different locations right now. And that's A, because he's in a different city than me, but also B, even if we were in an office, since we're not from the same household, we would be asked to, if I don't break everything in my house, we would be asked to stay 6 feet apart because we are not in the same household and we do not live together. Monica asks, what about jump parks? Like Urban Air is one that we have here in Birmingham, but I think she is referring to several different brands of jump parks with big inflatable, I don't know what the correct word is, but ball pits, things like that.
I believe they're allowed to reopen.
Angelique says, so basically everything but bars and clubs can reopen. So Angelique, you're half right. Bars are allowed to reopen. Bars have been allowed to reopen since that last amendment. And they just have to maintain their distance between tables and adhere to those guidelines. Now, the clubs, again, that's a line that's very fuzzy, but technically nightclubs cannot open at the moment. Concert venues, bars, restaurants, breweries, those places can open for dine-in service, but nightclubs cannot at this point. We're going to take 2 more questions. One, we're going to take from Patrice. She asks, how prepared are hospitals for this next phase? I will deflect that to you, Mike.
That's a great question. And although, there's sort of the gist of what happened today is a lot of things will be opening up, but there are real concerns here in Montgomery. The hospitals, the ICUs are pretty much filled up. They're having to send some patients to Birmingham. So Dr. Harris still seems confident that statewide the hospital capacity is sufficient, but it is a concern. And, that was certainly big news in Montgomery yesterday when the mayor announced that the ICUs were pretty much filled in Montgomery and patients were having to be sent to Birmingham. So that's a concern.
Right. And I know that there has been a surge in Montgomery County of these coronavirus cases. Just a reminder, we announced our town hall series today with different mayors from across the state, and we will have Montgomery's mayor Stephen Reed on June 18th on our town hall series to take some questions. So the last question that we're going to take right now is from Bonnie, and she asks about Alabama state parks.
Oh, Alabama state parks are open. They're not restricted, but once again, that's a good question. But as far as I know, they're open.
Got it. Well, we've enjoyed looking at your questions and answering the ones that we could. Please check back on AL.com on our website and on our social media pages for the latest information about what's going to be open, what is not. I hope all of you have a very safe Memorial Day weekend if we do not see you before then. And Mike, thanks so much for keeping all of us up to date on this.
Well, thanks for having me. Sorry I didn't have more answers. And one more point is the governor did leave open the possibility of pulling back some if that's needed. If things get worse, that's always a possibility.
That's a good point, Mike.
Stress the need for personal responsibility. Good
point, Mike. That is definitely a good point to make. And, we will say that these again, May 22nd, which is tomorrow at 5 p.m. And, if these restrictions are not pulled back, then this order we're talking about will end July the 3rd at 5 p.m. You can find all the latest information about this order, the prior amendments, and more information on AL.com. And y'all stay safe. Have a great weekend, and we will see you later.
Thank you.